Alright, I'd like to use this web lecture to review a few things that I barely covered in our discussion of Chapter 11, Sexual Selection. Alright, so across plants, animals, fungi, across life, there are different mechanisms of reproduction from sexual organisms to asexual ones. And ultimately, this week's topic is to explain some of that variation. And at the beginning of class, I reviewed the twofold cost of sex, that asexual lineages, or parthenogenic lineages, another word for it, can produce more individuals by reproducing clonally or parthenogenically than sexual lineages. And sexual lineages end up essentially wasting individuals on males that don't reproduce. All right, so your book has a nice table that covers such of this. And one of two explanations for why sex is beneficial is the Red Queen hypothesis. The other, which I'm not going to mention, is Muller's ratchet, which is a way that recombination of chromosomes during meiosis can undo mutations that accumulate in asexual lineages. The idea of the Red Queen hypothesis, it's essentially running in place. That parasites and other agonists on organisms force them to have sex, and that recombination allows them to keep up with one another. And there are a number of very nice experimental systems that have shown the benefits of sex. One of these is this snail from New Zealand, Potamopyrgus antipodarium. A researcher at the University of Indiana, Keith Clay, and his group have worked with this for years. And this snail suffers from infections of a trematode, and depending on the frequency of the trematode in different populations, this snail, the number of males in this snail that's capable of reproducing asexually increases. So this snail can switch between being sexual and asexual. And in the populations with the greatest amounts of infection by the trematode, there are more males. There's more sex, essentially to keep up with these high rates of infection. So sex is important for combining and mixing chromosomes during offspring reproduction. It allows recombination during meiosis. And I'm not covering linkage this semester in evolution, but it's important to understand this. It's an MCAT topic, it's a GRE topic. Hermaphroditic species or lineages that self-fertilize but reproduce sexually do not create genetic variation. So some organisms like dandelions look like they have working flowers, but in fact they're reproducing parthenogenically. But what is important about sex in an evolutionary perspective is that it creates new genetic variation by mixing parental alleles. So one explanation for this is the Red Queen effect, running in place. And it explains the advantages of sex because it allows recombination of chromosomes to generate novel variations that may be effective at deterring parasites or other agonists. But other ecological situations beyond just parasites may require rapid evolution. So in islands where different groups of organisms might radiate, these are good examples where sex may be important as well. All right, so in class I reviewed the importance of anisogamy. This is the differential size of sperm and eggs, or pollen and eggs, in animals and plants. So females are ultimately limited in fecundity by the number of eggs they produce, while males are usually limited by the number of mates they can obtain. And these differential investments can extend long beyond fertilization, particularly in organisms like humans that have extensive parental care, or also in pipefish. There's another complication that I did not cover in class. Females have certain paternity. They're sure that they're the parent of the offspring. While males in general are uncertain, females may be mating with other males. And parental care that's not directed towards one's own offspring is ultimately a waste in evolutionary terms. So another piece of terminology is the operational sex ratio, the number of males to females. This differential reproductive success can result in competition for mates, where males, if they're limited by the number of females with which they can mate, ultimately they'll compete with each other. So this creates both intrasexual and intersexual selection. And in general, this is selection on males to maximize fitness by mating with multiple females, and can lead to male-biased offspring sex ratios. So one of the results of this is that males in many animal species end up with ornaments, features that make them attractive to increase their mating success, or with armaments, essentially weaponry used to outcompete other individuals. So elephant seals are a particularly good example of this because of their extreme variance in reproductive success, where a few males sire most of the pups in these species. In general, in species that have competition, this competition for mates is costly, and males can suffer extensively from this competition. In fact, in many cases, dying younger than they would otherwise from the competition. In many animals, males compete for territory, so it's the area where they're going to reproduce that females are looking for, and males occupy that territory and compete with one another for it. And so females in many of these cases are choosing the males, either the male that wins the competition or has the territory. And the benefits of female choosing can come in multiple ways. It may be direct benefits. In a number of insects and other organisms, the males provide food, nest sites, or protection to the females. In other cases, it's indirect, where really the females are selecting something about the genetic quality that they get from the male. They're essentially selecting for a sexy son. And this is at times been called the sexy son hypothesis. So a number of insects make spermatophores that are given as essentially a nuptial gift to the females with which they mate. These spermatophores often have protein, carbohydrates, sometimes they even have chemical defenses that may deter birds from eating certain butterfly species. There's some fascinating insect examples of these spermatophores. There's a researcher at Cornell, Tom Eisner, who recently passed away, who worked on this in Central Florida for many years. In some of the most extreme cases, which many of us are familiar, are cannibalism, where the female actually eats the male as the nuptial gift. So there are a number of katydids where this is particularly striking. There are also spiders where this occurs. In many spiders, females and males are extremely dimorphic, and it's actually the female who's quite a bit bigger. And the female in many species will eat the male as after mating with him. All right, so there are a number of direct benefits. Your text outlines a number of these. Then some of the more fascinating stuff is in ornaments. These are particularly striking in a number of birds and also in many reptiles and some amphibians. So in birds, this seems to, there are a number of bird species where there are really truly striking male ornaments. There are also some insects where this is striking. So in stalk-eyed flies, they have these enormous stalked eyes that are so big one wonders how they can get through the forest with these stalks. And in general, in species that have these, the female preferences are consistent. One trend across all animals is for red colors. And there seems to be a predisposition in females for this. Red pigments are often physiologically expensive to make. They're based on carotenoids in many animals, and they can both indicate a good diet and good genes, and females seem to have a sensory bias for it, and that is sort of a pre-adaptation or a predisposition for females to choose that. All right, so it's a moment of review. Sexual selection is all about anisogamy. It's an important driver of behavior because it constitutes the fundamental difference in the sexes in how they allocate to their offspring. Females are usually limited by the number of eggs they can produce, while males are limited by the number of matings that they can have. This can lead to biased operational sex ratios, with males often fighting over females, and females usually choosing or being the choosy sex. This can be based on appearance or courtship behavior, and the variance in reproductive success among the sexes influences the opportunity for sexual selection. All right, so indirect benefits I've mentioned, and there are a couple different parts of this. One aspect is good genes, or females selecting for a sexy son, so that usually the ornament that the male has, because it's physiologically costly to make, indicates that the male must have good genes. A second thing that often happens is runaway selection, and I'm going to come back to this. This is something that can happen when the female preference is genetically linked, occurs more or less on the same chromosome as the genes for the male ornament. So this linked selection for female preference and male ornament can lead to greater and greater increase in the ornament. Another possibility is something called the Fisher-Zahavi process, about which I'm not going to talk a lot, but it's basically about the cost of the ornament. All right, so one thing that costly ornaments can signal is honesty. So the best ornaments, if you will anthropomorphize, are those that are expensive to make and where an animal can't cheat, or a male can't cheat in making it. Often ornaments or weapons involve trade-offs. So one of the co-authors of the textbook, Doug Emlin, has for years studied the horns of dung beetles, and they can have quite elaborate horns that they use to guard nesting burrows in dung, and females will choose the best burrows. And building these horns is quite expensive. It detracts from the male's opportunity to actually build the tunnel that females will use. But they're quite important for defending that territory. So he's done some brilliant work showing the trade-offs in this system. All right, so females who choose males with attractive traits can pass those alleles on to offspring. This is essentially a female choosing a partner with a good ornament is going to have a sexy son. These traits are often arbitrary, but there may be some predisposition, and if they allow females to choose the highest quality males, they will be selected for. All right, so there are some other terminology: monogamy, polygyny, and polyandry. This indicate whether there are multiple females with a single male or multiple males or a female mating with multiple males. Polyandry is in general fairly rare, particularly in human societies it's fairly rare, but it does happen across animals. There are a number of species, particularly birds, that do have a lot of pair bonding, but recent genetic work has often shown that even if they pair bond, there's a fair amount of cheating that goes on. In birds and in many other animals, pair bonding is pretty common. Pair bonding often occurs in species where their ecology demands two parents, where a single parent really isn't able to successfully rear offspring. So in many birds where they have to go out and find food for the chick after the egg hatches while one parent watches the egg, it really takes two parents. One parent may not be able to sit on the nest through the entire gestation period of the egg without starving. And in those cases, it really takes two parents for the bird to make it. But there may still be better males or better females on the market, and there's a lot of cheating that goes on in these birds. All right, so these systems are in flux. They can evolve because of the benefits and costs they confer on both males and females, and they depend on the opportunities that arise from both sexual selection and the underlying ecology of the species. And in many species, there's really a combination of systems. Okay, so in polyandrous species, where a female is mating with multiple males, there is selection for traits that allow the male to increase his paternity. This is sperm competition. I talked about this extensively in class. There can be a variety of chemical or physical means by which sperm compete, from attaching to the vaginal tract, sperm plugs, and other means of keeping other sperm out or removing sperm that's already there. One thing that sperm competition does drive is evolution of larger testes, and there's some evidence of this in our own group of organisms, in apes and primates more broadly. And there are differences among us and our closer relatives, where chimps do have significantly larger testes than we do, and have a mating system that has far less pair bonding than occurs in humans. There are many animals where there's evidence that females can choose which sperm they want, and they may discriminate on all sorts of factors, from receptors and other proteins on the surface of the sperm to other chemicals into the sperm, or in insects, this may be on the basis of the spermatophore that they receive from males. In Drosophila, they have giant, truly giant sperm, and usually insemination is by 1 or 2 sperm rather than the millions of sperm that characterize human ejaculate. And in a number of organisms, there's really some cryptic female choice. They may look like females or mating with multiple different males, but females may exert a lot of choice. So there's some interesting evidence of that even in fruit flies and other organisms. All right, so multiple mating can lead to sperm competition among males, and females can often exert control over which sperm fertilizes eggs. All right, so one of the things that can happen is sexual conflict, where traits confer a fitness benefit in one sex but a cost to the other. I mentioned this in the case of many insects, where appendages on male genitalia may allow them to remove sperm from the female reproductive tract, but this can damage the female. There's some evidence that sperm is also poisonous to a variety of females of many species, such as fruit flies, and shortens their lives and exerts other physiological effects on them. So a really striking example in ducks, where there's a lot of evolution of both phallus length in male ducks and spirals in female reproductive tracts, and a lot of competition, a lot of sort of conflict among the sexes over reproduction, and females of many ducks are truly harassed by males. In Drosophila, there's evidence of antagonistic coevolution, and this is sort of the shortening of female lifespan by the number of matings that they have. So there are chemicals in fruit fly sperm, or in fruit fly ejaculate, that shorten female fly lifespans. There are examples in water striders, and there are a variety of traits. So in some cases it may be proteins in the semen, or it may be RNA interference. And as our capacity to measure these things grows, I think there's going to be some fascinating biology coming forth in future years. All right, so one other thing that I want to touch on that I brought up earlier is runaway sexual selection. This is where particularly ornaments become truly sort of ridiculous. So in many cases, the ornament may start because there's a sensory bias. Females prefer red colors or a long tail. And this may indicate that there's a sexy son, that the ornament indicates good genes. But in some cases, this leads to runaway sexual selection. So I want to come back to these stalk-eyed flies, using an image from the other textbook, from Freeman and Heron. And what happens is female preference ends up correlated with the ornament. So females that prefer longer eye stalks also have male offspring that have longer eye stalks. This correlation, this genetic correlation, can lead to, in a system where there are multiple genes, it's a polygenic trait affected by alleles at 6 or more genes, each which contributes a small additive increase in say, eye stalk length and eye stalk preference. In systems where there's a lot of quantitative genetic variation, it can lead to runaway sexual selection for longer and longer traits. And people studying eye stalks have found this strong correlation between female preference and male ornament size. And then experimentally, they can play with this. So the group that worked with eye stalks showed, using artificial selection, that they could select for females that preferred shorter eye stalks and get males in those lineages with shorter eye stalks. And they could do the same for long. But when they didn't exert any selection in their control treatment, they found that there was still a preference of females for longer and longer eye stalks. And that indicates that the eye stalk is in part an indication, are being used as an indication of good genes, and that there's an underlying predisposition in stalk-eyed flies for males with longer eye stalks. But when selection is artificially imposed for shorter ones, there's variation that would allow females to, in those lineages, select shorter and shorter ones. All right, so I think that's about everything that I'm going to cover on this. This is a fascinating topic, and we'll come back to some of it when we deal with humans again, and if we have time with life history evolution. Thank you.